When city councillors are making decisions, they often look to the civil service for guidance. So when council was trying to decide on whether it should invest in an LRT or a subway extension in Scarborough, many councillors relied on the information provided by staff. But a Toronto Star investigation shows that that information may have been tainted. City Councillor Josh Matlow says it's just another example of a growing problem at City Hall, and he's worried that it's putting the best interests of Torontonians in jeopardy. Josh, good morning.
Good morning, Matt.
Walk us through this briefing note that dealt with the Scarborough TTC expansion. Just as plainly as possible, what did it say?
I'd be happy to. I want to make a point, though, of saying that the vast majority of our public service do their jobs with integrity every day. What this investigation by the Star demonstrates is that there are a handful of staff that I think there are some significant questions about the objectivity of their advice.
Okay.
So the briefing note that the Star kind of exposed as untrue made an argument, or actually gave advice, that the price of the LRT, in a nutshell, the price of the LRT was inflated and would go up to roughly the same price, over $3 billion, as the one-stop subway proposal. And it also suggested that there is no way to get work started until 2021 because they had to wait for the Eglinton Crosstown work to be completed at Kennedy.
Right.
I actually did a lot of research into that question. And what I was able to find, and with some just basic research, was that just wasn't true, that there was no reason why they couldn't start at Shepherd rather than Kennedy. I actually asked that question on the floor of council, and Andy Byford of the TTC admitted as much. And the maintenance costs that they suggested would go up, in fact, if one takes the time to read the master agreement with Metrolinx, clearly states that that's covered by Metrolinx, not the city, and wouldn't have been an issue for our budget. So the point is that I actually wrote a 2,000-word open letter back before the vote that was shared with many of my colleagues and the public. If anyone had just done the research, they would have seen that that briefing note was untrue. Now, the biggest concern is not only was the briefing note untrue, but then it was shared directly and solely with the mayor's office, their communications staff, and the chair of the TTC's office. The code of conduct for staff is that information, business-related information, needs to be shared with all of council at the same time.
The vote is over. It's not, and it's not going to be revisited. I can't imagine, although anything's possible in the city. So don't hold me to that. But
fair comment.
If you look at this from a broader perspective, why does something like this matter? If the information that came out, as you say, perhaps was not necessarily factual.
Well, yeah, my view about the Scarborough Transit debate is well known. This isn't about that. This is a much bigger and much more concerning issue. Whenever council is making decisions, whether they be small or, in this case, spending billions of tax dollars and public policy decisions that impact our lives for generations to come, no matter what your opinion is on one side or another of the debate, it should be based on factual information, objective, independent advice of staff. And I've seen a pattern here where one time after another, city staff, some city staff, not all, some city staff, provide information that certainly seems to be, and in this case exposed to be, influenced by the politicization of City Hall rather than just their objective advice.
What do you mean? What do you mean the politicization of City Hall?
Well, far too often, and it's not just this mayor's office, it's probably every mayor's office that's ever been, and even individual councillors at times, will put pressure on city staff to write reports in a way that either put information in there that will support their argument or the destination that they're trying to arrive at, or put pressure on them to omit information that conflicts with their arguments. In the Scarborough Transit case, it's evident that happened. But there are other examples of where city staff sometimes take it upon themselves. Perhaps they have a political opinion, and they will campaign to achieve that goal. No matter what the motivation is, whether they were pressured, many fear. Remember Gary Webster, Councillor Shelley Carroll brought up a good point in a Star article this morning, that Gary Webster, when he said that an LRT made more sense than a subway, he was very quickly fired by Rob Ford and council.
Right.
So no matter what the motivation is, council and Torontonians need to rely on staff to make objective and independent advice.
We had City Councillor Kristen Wong-Tam on the program earlier this morning. She was talking about the bid for Expo 2025. She supports this, says it would be great for the City of Toronto. Staff report says that it could cause significant financial, operational, and reputational risks. Do you feel like you can trust that report?
Well, and I'll speak as somebody who I respectfully disagree with Councillor Wong-Tam on the Expo bid that she's championing. That being said, though, if like I was able to demonstrate with evidence, right, in black and white, that staff's suggestions were completely inaccurate and untrue, if she can demonstrate that that's the case, then I'm going to be open-eyed and open ears to see that because I have had experiences where staff's advice has been based on misinformation. So I would, if she does have something like that to demonstrate, to share, of course I would be open to reading it.
I think those of us who live here and rely on elected officials to help guide the city hope that you are making, evidence-based decisions. Is that the case, or is this decision-based evidence-making?
Well, far too often the latter is the case. Now, listen, again, city staff, more times than not, provide great information. The system's supposed to work that way, that we hire experts to provide advice to admittedly lay people to make policy decisions. But far too often, either city staff provide information that is either tainted or politically motivated for one reason or another, or councillors will deliberately decide to ignore factual information to make policy that suits their political needs, as I would submit was the case in the Scarborough Transit debate. But I don't know if you recall this, but do you remember Doug Ford when Rob Ford was mayor?
I've heard of him, yeah.
You may have heard of him. He brought forward now a universally sort of discredited suggestion that the Portland's revitalization should be based on building a monorail and a Ferris wheel and various things like that. Well, some people may forget that, in fairness to Doug Ford, the city manager at the time actually signed off on that report. And if you ask the former city manager his opinion about that today, he may suggest that he regrets it. So there is a pattern. It's not just this mayor. It probably goes back many mayors and other councillors too. But far too often, they know that actually city staff are so powerful that at council meetings, sometimes they don't need to even say anything. If you've been to a council meeting, you'll know that a councillor can ask a city staff member a question, and they simply have to put a nod, just sort of move their head up and down, and that will influence the outcome of the vote. So we need to know with certainty that their advice, that their opinion is based on factual, independent evidence, rather than any persuasion one way or another. And in the Scarborough case, if you actually read through the briefing note, and if you read through, all the evidence to the contrary, that disputes not only what the TTC said, but even what the city manager's staff, Peter Notaro, said at the city council meeting during the vote, you'll know that there were factually untrue statements made or misleading suggestions left that swayed the votes, and many councillors will say, that was the information that they relied on. Even the mayor yesterday said, I have a right, to quote him, I have a right to rely on city staff's advice. And my retort would simply be, and respectfully, we have a right to do so. But if the math doesn't add up and the advice doesn't seem to make sense, we also have a duty to respectfully challenge and to make sure that we have the right facts in front of us before we make a huge decision.
I have a feeling we'll talk about this in the days ahead. In the meantime, Josh, thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you, Matt.
Josh Matlow, Toronto City Councillor, says he's concerned about politics at City Hall and how that perhaps could lead to staff members who may have a bias of their own, as well as the spread of misinformation on council. Settle in. This could be interesting. It's 20 minutes right now after 8. David Rocco.